Is there a global war on farming? Watch this.
For the past 6 months or so, my team and I have been working on a full-length documentary project called Eat the Bugs, which exposes the topic that I believe is incredibly important to almost everyone, the global war on farmers, as well as the agenda that's behind the curtains that's actually pushing the entire thing. Now, as many of you know, this all started when my team and I traveled over to the Netherlands sometime last year in order to cover the farmer protests that were happening over there. And after meeting with the local farmers and hearing their stories about how they were quite literally being pushed off their generational farms by their government, well, I was shocked, to say the least. But after we dug deeper into it, it became obvious that this was not confined to the Netherlands. In fact, this war on farmers is indeed global. It's happening everywhere, including right here in the US. And for some odd reason, it coincides perfectly with this trend of celebrities promoting edible insects. And so we've been traveling for the better part of the last year on a mission to really, for one, understand this global war on farmers, the agenda behind it, as well as what it really means for the future of the food on our supermarket store shelves, as well as what common people like you and I, who are just caught up in the middle of all this, can actually do to prevent a future where our kids have no option rather than to eat bugs. And so right now, we're putting together all of the interviews and all of the findings from our journey into this new, awesome documentary, the one that's called Eat the Bugs. And I really cannot wait to share it with you this upcoming summer.
As for celebrities eating bugs,
See the hard part where you have the teeth?
Oh, wow.
Take the fangs out.
Yeah. Have you done this before?
Yeah. I think it's always been a part of the diet, the bugs, but then I think there is a truth to the survival during the war. Of course, when people were being starved, they were able to survive on things like this, and they did.
When was the first time you had these bugs?
I first had them when I was first in country. Crickets. You start with crickets.
Yeah.
Crickets in a beer, and then you kind of, move up to tarantulas. Go ahead. How do you flip a scorpion? Good? Is that good, guys? Dinner. You want to share a spider? Hot? It's actually really good, the flavor.
please welcome Epoch Times' Roman Balmakov. Roman, thank you for joining me. A war on farmers sounds about as intelligent as a war on food.
I couldn't agree more with you. And unfortunately for you, Larry, if this comes to fruition, it'll likely hit you first out of anyone in the country, just because you live in California, and that seems to be the epicenter of this thing here in America. But yeah, what we sort of, like the video you played mentioned, we started seeing these instances of governments putting into place policies that seem to completely disenfranchise their farmers at a time when there's already food instability across the world because of the Ukraine-Russia war and other factors, famines, droughts, things like that. And so we started looking into it and traveling around the world and speaking to different farmers and the agricultural departments in different governments. And through taking these different interviews and putting them together and looking at some of the source documents that were coming out of the UN, what we found was this tapestry of what I can only describe as a global war on farmers. And I mean, just to back up, one of the reasons that there is a war on farmers is because there's this ideology that's sort of prevalent across certain people in power, that the world is ending due to man-made climate change, due to climate change, specifically that caused by man. And one of the largest sectors that they are going after in order to combat this threat is the agricultural sector. And so in order to save the planet, they're willing to forsake the farmers, to kick them off their land, and to make up for that loss of protein. Here comes the bugs, right? The bugs are the salvation we've been waiting for.
How do farmers contribute to the global warming crisis? What's their crime?
Well, it's a very big rabbit hole if you go down into it. Let's take the case of the Netherlands, for example. At a shallow level, if you just ask someone on the street, how do farmers contribute to the global warming problem? They'll say, well, the cows fart, and the cows, when they poop and they pee, and that combines, that it releases ammonia into the air, and it causes things like acid rain and acidification of natural environments, etc. So that's sort of the shallow level understanding that people have. Once you dig deeper into it, though, and this is the case for almost every country we went to, once you dig a little bit beneath the surface, it's not all how it seems. Like in the case of the Netherlands, basically the government there signed this agreement with the EU that they're going to preserve certain parts of nature preserves. They're going to preserve these nature preserves to be exactly how they were in the year 2000. And so if there's too much nitrogen in the environment, things like clover, hay, moss, those plants, they don't thrive in those high nitrogen environments. And so they'll likely die out, and other types of flora, other types of plants will grow. Now, there's no problem with that. It's an ecosystem. It constantly evolves. But because they signed this agreement saying they have to keep it exactly the way it is in the year 2000, they're saying, okay, well, these farmers, they've got to go, right? And at the same time, the Minister of Housing in the Netherlands, he's seeing this problem with too many migrants, and so he's walking around the countryside saying, "Hey, you see this rural area here? This will make great apartment buildings in the near future." So it all kind of like, again, there's nobody you can point to and say, "Hey, this one person lays it out. This one minister in the government is saying, hey, we're kicking off these farmers to put apartment buildings in this area to make room for migrants, and we're going to replace the protein with bugs." Not one person says it. But when you look at the different individuals and how all their different individual policies and different agencies come together, that's the effect. They're essentially kicking out the farmers and replacing it with bugs. So that's I hope that answers your question.
So Roman, food production by definition falls off then, right?
It would have to. It would have to, yeah.
And the solution is eat bugs.
One of the solutions is to eat the bugs, that's for sure. That's why you have a lot of these bug manufacturers popping up. There's a huge plant that was recently opened in Canada. There's another one opening up in the US later this year. There's a giant plant that recently opened up in France. That's why you're seeing the European Health Commission recently come out and endorse certain types of bugs as edible, meaning it's safe to eat, and that it can now be included in the ingredients label of food without having to plaster the fact that it's made with bugs. You can just put it in small print on the back of food items. You're seeing the same thing with synthetic meat come into the fore. So, I mean, this is happening. Now, by the way, to anyone listening, especially, again, I know you're out in California, so I'm sure a lot of people out there like to eat bugs. And it's true, you can go to Whole Foods right now. You can buy cricket chips. You can buy mealworm-based protein powder, and that's fine. It's perfect, and people can eat it if they want. What we're uncovering in the documentary is this agenda that's behind the scenes that people are just not aware of, wherein, let's say 5 years from now, you go to the store and you suddenly realize, like, wow, this beef is $25 per half a pound. I guess I'll have to eat these bugs, which are now less expensive and more widely available. It's that type of it seems like it's manifesting in that way, where they're sort of shifting the incentives for these companies such that the consumer on the end will sort of have to make that choice because it's just the only economical choice to make.
Got a question for you. Are you concerned with stock market volatility?
Markets closing in on their worst year since the financial crisis.
Since 2020, the Dow closed down more than 1,100 points.
Financial markets had their worst day since the start of the pandemic.
Do you really trust this economy?
The U.S. economy could be headed for a recession.
Tonight, the alarming spike in inflation soaring to its highest level in nearly 40 years.
What if you can invest in a portfolio with a high fixed rate of return that's not correlated to the stock market? Well, you can turn your monthly income on or off, compound it, whatever you choose, and get this, there is no loss of principal if you need your money back, and absolutely no fees. Just log on to investyrefy.com. Folks, I personally invest with my own money with YRefi. So log on to investyrefy.com or call 888-YREFI24. That's 888-YREFI24. Roman, is the premise valid? Is it true that farming adds to climate change, and that the methane gas released from cows is having an adverse impact on the climate? Is any of that even true?
I mean, maybe. That's the best I can say. The scientists we've spoken to, they're not 100% clear whether that's the case or not. Even the ones who say that it is contributing to the CO2 levels, and especially the ammonia levels in certain communities around around these farming areas. There are ways and there are technologies that you could implement to reduce that from happening. For instance, we talked to a scientist who discussed this technology, and it's widely available. I mean, you can install it. It costs a bit, but it basically separates the poo and the pee from the cows such that they don't combine and they don't have the ammonia going up into the air. And ironically, to implement that type of a technology would cost less than having kicking off all these farmers off their land and buying up their land for the state. That would actually wind up costing less for the state, but that's not the option. This is the case of the Netherlands. That's not the option they're going with. They're going with the other option, which is more expensive, to kick all the farmers off the land. And so you kind of have to guess that there's another agenda behind it. It's not just about saving the planet and all that stuff. It might in fact be about kicking the farmers off the land to get that land to develop it into housing for migrants. Yeah.
So Roman, what did the farmers in the Netherlands end up doing? Did they go along with this? Are there protests? Are there lawsuits? What's going on?
They fought back. They fought back there. They recently had, well, of course, I'm sure a lot of your viewers have seen those large protests that they had with the tractors, where they even went to their equivalent of our Congress building and shoved manure on there as a form of protest. They blocked roads. They blocked warehouse distribution centers. I mean, they made a big fuss. But recently, in the most recent Senate election, they destroyed the ruling coalition. They wound up sweeping the Senate elections and it put a big roadblock on the agenda that was being implemented in the Netherlands. In Sri Lanka, we went there as well. I'm sure a lot of your viewers have also seen that when the people were just so fed up with the government, they actually stormed that capital, and the president wound up fleeing. He abdicated power, and a new administration came. And in Sri Lanka, it was a unique situation where overnight the president there outlawed synthetic fertilizers to sort of kind of a longer story there, but it's sort of also based on the people who are whispering in his ear from the UN and from these different NGOs saying, hey, if you get rid of organic, synthetic fertilizer, you can save the planet, blah, blah, blah. So he banned synthetic fertilizers, and overnight, just farmers were completely out of luck there, and they wound up storming the Capitol. In the US, what we're seeing is a lot of farmers are fighting back through legal channels. We spoke to some farmers out in California who are just being decimated by your governor's water policies. They're winding up trying to quote unquote, save the salmon and save some trout at the expense of the livelihoods of entire areas of farmers. But at the same time, they're just pouring a lot of water into the ocean. So in every area, it's kind of a unique situation. But the cumulative effect is that farmers are just suffering. And they're doing the best to fight back. But as you know, farmers make up in almost any country a tiny segment of the population. So it's hard for them to have a voting bloc. So the best they can do is use their tractors or use their trailers or embargo certain roads or certain warehouses so people can't get their food. That's pretty much the best they can do. It's a tough situation for them.
Isn't the justification, at least in part, that farmers are more efficient than ever before? We're producing more with less than ever before, so not to worry?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, but again, that's a rational argument. If you want to make a rational argument, yes, you're right. I mean, I'm too young to have lived through this, but I've read about it quite a bit, about the famous book, The Population Bomb,
right.
About how there's going to be too many people. This was written, I believe, in the 50s, 60s. That by 1975 there would just be too many people, and at that time.
Right.
At that time, the author of that book, he was a Stanford researcher. He was suggesting adding certain chemicals into the water and the food supply here in America to sterilize people so they wouldn't reproduce, and so the population would be kept under control. Right. But that wound up not happening because farming and farmers became more dynamic. They introduced new developments that they were able to find from scientific breakthroughs, and now we're able to support 8 billion people, and it's the same. I mean, throughout, let's say, the last 20 years, farmers have been able to produce something like 3 times the amount of crop without increasing the amount of nitrogen that they're putting in, just because they're getting so much more efficient. But it's never good enough for the environmental activists, because they're activists and they have an agenda other than what they say.
Yeah, the book you're talking about is by Paul Ehrlich,
yeah.
And he had a famous bet with an economist about a certain kind of resources that are not going to be available. They bet on several different things that are going to be. Paul Ehrlich said they were going to be too expensive, and he lost every single bet. Every single one of them. All the horrible things he predicted were going to happen just did not happen. So, bottom line, is there a plan by the United Nations to basically phase out farming? Is there some sort of written document that says that?
Yes and no. That again, and I can't wait until we release this documentary and the fact checks are going to be like, fact check false. There's no document that says that we're going to phase out farming in exchange for bugs. And I address that in the documentary, but it's never good enough for the fact checkers. But it's what we're exposing is the actual effects that it will have. When you have the Sustainable Development Goals encourage governments to the opposite of encourage farming, and at the same time you're encouraging things like synthetic meat production, bug-based protein production. I mean, the effects are going to be clear, and we kind of lay that on the documentary that you don't need a concrete, hey, this is point A, B, C, D document.
Right.
But when you put it all together and you're like, okay, well, this is obviously what's going to happen, right? So that's sort of that's what we're able to find.
Roman, did you eat any bugs?
I did. I tried the bug powder. I mean, listen, it tasted like nothing, like dirt. And like I mentioned earlier, it's fine. Like you can go to Whole Foods right now, and if you're into it, you can eat bugs. The problem is that they're forcing it on us. That's sort of
right.
That's sort of the problem. Like it's the forcing this ideology on people that we're exposing, not necessarily the bugs as a food item itself.
And what about synthetic meat? Have you tried that?
I haven't, and the bugs, I'm like, okay, I'll try it. It's whatever, but I kind of don't even want to try synthetic meat.
Well, Roman Balmakoff, I'm looking forward to the documentary.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to publishing it.
Let him eat bugs. Thanks, Roman.
Thank you, Larry.
Now hit that like button because I know you enjoy the show. And be sure to hit that subscribe button because I know you enjoy the show. Or did I say that already? Scroll down and you'll see where you can join our mailing list. Why? Because from time to time, for reasons that confound us, YouTube has issues with our vids. Maybe because of the stuff we said about the election. Maybe because it was some of the stuff we said about COVID. I don't know. But in order to make sure you don't miss any of our videos, get on our mailing list. Finally, you see that round donate button? Hit that, throw a little something in the tip jar. Make sure we can continue to give you hard-hitting, candid programming. Remember, LarryWithEpoch.com, LarryWithEpoch.com. I'm Larry Elder. This has been the Larry Elder Show for Epoch Times. We got a country to say. See you next time.